So I was first introduced to you and your work at the V&A Digital Design Weekend in 2022, where you were presenting Chaos Bells. And then we got talking in the pub afterwards about how traditional musical instruments aren't designed with any form of accessibility in mind. Could you highlight for myself and people who aren't familiar necessarily with musical instruments or design what some of those concerns were and how you've kind of addressed them or put them into Chaos Bells?
Yeah, so I was first kind of brought up to speed with this by the OHMI Trust. So that's OHMI, One-Handed Musical Instrument Trust. Mm-hmm. That's an organisation and a charity whose goal is to make every two-handed instrument a one-handed version for that. So essentially, they have flagged that a lot of orchestral instruments can only be played with two hands, and that isn't very accessible for people with upper limb disabilities, people with, varying dexterity, and so on. So they have been working with instrument designers all around the world. They run a competition, and it's actually, I think it's running this year, for people designing new technologies to make instruments more accessible. And I collaborated with them back in 2018. They were looking for some help with a one-handed violin. Mm-hmm. And so I was assigned the project to collaborate with them and consider different ways for a one-handed violin to be made. So I spent about 6 months on this project, and the thing that was really interesting was all of the ideas I had, I would then bring to the OHMI Trust. And there was one member of the OHMI Trust, Rachel Wolfson, who was meeting with me and is really very kind of integral to this community of one-handed musicians. And so she really knows the kind of access needs of this community. And I was saying, how about note selection with your feet, and she would say yes, but a lot of people who have an upper limb disability also have a leg disability. For example, they may have hemiplegia, which is paralysis of one whole side of the body. So this is something that I think is really interesting, is that I don't have an upper limb disability, right? But that's why I wouldn't go into a project like this without collaborating with the community. Mm-hmm. And so I think, first of all, yes, musical instruments, they don't consider all the possible musicians who may want to be playing those instruments. Obviously, a lot of these orchestral instruments have been designed hundreds of years ago, and we're moving so far in accessibility now. But it is really important to include disabled people in the conversation, in the design process, collaboratively design. And so through that process, we came up with the concept of the one-handed violin, which you bow the string. And the reason that we retained the bow as the controlling arm is because violinists get so much expression out of the bow, whereas there is some expression in the selection of the tones, and you can do vibrato and things like that, glissando, but we thought that there's so much more expression in the bow, and so having to only choose one hand, that was the hand that we chose. And then to select the notes, I came up with the idea of a microphone that sits on your neck, and so the performer can hum the note that they want to play. They bow the string, and then the string is pitch shifted to match the note that is hummed by the performer. And there isn't latency because the way that the pitch shifting works is it's an electric violin. The signal goes into a microcomputer that's embedded inside the violin. It runs some code that pitch shifts. It recognizes the tone that's sung by the performer. It pitch shifts the string, the bowed string tone to match that pitch, and then it outputs it in a speaker out of a speaker that's embedded in the violin. So then that masks the original
the sound that's coming from the bow line.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, the latency for doing that is under 10 milliseconds. So that's under what humans can perceive in terms of latency.
Mm-hmm.
The issue with this is that you can still hear the performer hum. So it's not a perfect one-handed violin concept, but it was a pretty interesting project to work on. And then I made a one-handed stand. So in that picture, you can see the stand clips on to what I have there, which is some kind of road case. But I also made a vest where you could have that stand attached to the front of you and have it come up.
Oh, fantastic.
So that way you could be wearing the violin so that you wouldn't need to have it on your shoulder and use your chin to rest and things like that. You could be wearing it and bowing it that way. So there were two different kind of modes for the stand. And it does work. There's some videos online of it working. But the whole technology of the violin, I didn't come up with that technology. I just came up with the kind of concept and the kind of code that pitch shifts it, because the violin with the embedded speaker, that's a different augmented instrument that already exists. It's called the Svompolin, and it's designed by Laurel Pardue. And she has done a lot of work with that instrument in terms of making the violin more accessible for new players. So that instrument, having the embedded microcontroller, having the embedded speaker and masking the strings, it means that you can have embedded audio effects in the instrument. And so you can change kind of delays or reverbs or all kinds of effects, any kind of effect that you could, say, put in a guitar pedal or have a digital effect, or, you could even make it play a synth sound or something. But what her vision for that is to sort of have amounts of auto-tune so that newer beginners can really get on with playing the violin without having to spend, years.
Like perfecting your sound, you can get close enough and be able to develop all the muscles and the intuition.
Exactly. And then you can step back the auto-tune little by little and then work into, because the violin is such a difficult instrument, you have to tune your, get your hearing into tune. You have to use the bowing hand, you have to use the other hand for playing the strings, and it's just so much for a new player. So that's what the Svompolin is designed for. And then building on that was the one-handed violin.
So yeah, so to jump on that, your design there is the interaction design to make it more accessible.
Yeah.
So you talked about working with people with the disability. So how did that process go about when you were creating this interactive mode?
Well, it was only a 6-month placement, so I didn't actually bring in any one-handed violin players to play with it, but I did bring it to the OHMI conference, and there were one-handed musicians there and did play it, and they said it was working well for them. So I think if this were a project that would be trying to continue it and then kind of bring it to market or something, yeah, that would be really important to have some professional one-handed violin players to really feed back and bring their knowledge of how to best be working and navigating a world with one hand, into the design space. Obviously, I don't have that knowledge. I'm not the expert in that. So that's where that collaborative design would come into place. But knowing that it was just a short placement, I was working with Rachel from the OHMI Trust to represent that community.